right. Screen should be live now. All right. So, how to make a more useful and effective digital brand growth strategy. So, the overview for this is what we're going to go over is essentially the first and foremost thing is the four types of brands, and then what is a brand strategy, what is credibility, what is visibility, what is a growth strategy, and then the combination of all these things, what is a digital brand growth strategy. So the first slide kind of clearly depicts the four different types of brands. So when you're talking about brand, most people think of brand as just as a company or a corporation or maybe a personal brand, but ideally there are four different types of brands. There's a personal brand, and in this picture you can see Steve Jobs or myself. Those are the personal brands, right? Then you think about a company, and in this we're looking at Apple in relation to Steve Jobs or S.A. Grant in relation to Boss Uncaged. Then at the bottom left, you have a iPhone, which is a product brand, and in my case, it's my books and my courses. And then on the bottom right, it is iCloud, which is the service brand of Apple. And in my case, it's my groups, my clubs, and my done for you services. So you kind of see how all these four different brands become an ecosystem and how they work for each other. Ideally, I would say at the minimum, you need to have two of them to kind of have your business to be successful. And ideally, if you could have four, then you could have way more revenue streams and have a multiplying effect that happens. So let's dive into the first primary thing, brand strategy. So you could read the description. That's why I have it on the screen. But what I'm going to do is really go over the bullet points above. So when I'm talking about owned properties, I'm talking about trademarks. Obviously, we have a trademark lawyer on here, so she could definitely testify to that. Your brand voice, your brand style, your brand values, your brand purpose, your brand mission, and your brand vision. All of these are completely different things. And as you hear me say each one of these things, you're kind of probably thinking, okay, maybe you've heard of a couple of them, maybe you've heard of all of them, but ideally, can you identify in your business all of these elements? If you cannot, then that means that you do not have a brand strategy. And that's something that you'll need to kind of fill in the blanks. Because ideally, if you have this content set up, ready to go, then you can kind of move to the next stage. Going into credibility, right? So again, the definitions are on the bottom. The bold kind of highlights the main point of the definition, but I'm going to go over the bullet points. So if you're talking about credibility, your value proposition is probably one of your most important credibility items collectively. Like we did with our 1 minute presentations, you're telling us about who you are and what you're looking for and what's the value that you're going to be able to deliver to that particular client. So hence value proposition is the key one. The unfair advantage comes in the segment like we talked about before. Your trademarks can be an unfair advantage. Things that behind the scenes that nobody else knows how you do or how you do it could also be an unfair advantage to your customers and also to your in the sector that you're in. So ideally, you want to create unfair advantages that are specialized. That way, nobody else can copy them or duplicate them. Technology is another line of credibility. A lot of time, I use technology through and through. I mean, it's one of the things. If you understand automation and you understand these services and what they can do for you, then obviously you become more creditable in what you're doing because again, you have a system behind what you're doing and you're supported by that system. Your brand recognition goes hand in hand with what we talked about your brand strategy, but again, we're talking about credibility. If your brand is recognizable collectively across the board, whether it's on social media or whether it's through an individual, much like a Nike logo, anyone can see it and you don't need the words Nike. You can obviously say that that's Nike just by the swoosh. That's where you get more brand recognition. And that's something that we all need to work on collectively. The qualities and benefits of, again, for you, it's kind of like who you are. Who do people identify you as, or who do they identify your brand as, and what's the credit behind that? Like, are you someone that's trustworthy? Are you someone that's reliable? All of these go into credibility. And then last but not least is the viewing public's credibility, the ratings and the reviews. So written reviews, video reviews, Google reviews, 5-star ratings on Amazon, all of these collectively fall under credibility. Visibility. So search engine optimization or SEO for short, that is something that if you're not doing, you want to kind of at least get on the bandwagon and start optimizing it. And obviously Neil can kind of tell you when you're talking about video podcasting, this is a great way to do that because you're starting with a source-based content and then you can transcribe that content and get a lot of SEO value from the transcriptions from that video. So you want to think about this. If you're doing speaking engagements, if you're doing 10-minute education spots, all of this content, you should be recording it and transcribing it to help your visibility by, using that content for the SEO purposes. Your visuals comes back to your brand, but more so like what are you designing? What are you developing? It can be a post on social media, it can be a postcard, it can be a thumbnail for YouTube. All of these are visuals, which kind of they have to have that brand recognition, they have to have symmetry between them, and obviously your call of action needs to be on every single one of these. And then the next three is digital marketing, email marketing, and content marketing. Again, all three of these work together in unison for different reasons. Your email marketing is essentially the strategy to kind of talk to your community that you currently have. Your digital marketing is essentially outreach into your cold market sectors. And then your content marketing is going to overlap between the two. You're going to have an opportunity to create content pretty regularly if you do it correctly. And then you want to source that content over and over again. And I could testify to that because, again, I'm using social media to propagate all my content collectively. I'm probably posting right now while I'm talking to you guys, and I have no idea. So, again, you want to have this leverage. Last but not least is your channels of communication. So this is where you have social media. This is where you have video. This is where you have posters, billboards, anything that you can use to communicate to your target audience or to communicate to your potential clients. That's your channels of communication. And again, all of these items build up to your visibility. And last but not least, and my favorite is growth strategy. So again, if you're talking about growth, you're talking about scale. So if you're not thinking about scale, then obviously you don't have a growth strategy. So that's the first thing you want to. If right now, if you have one particular service that you do X, well, what's Y and Z? What can you add on to that service? And it's as simple as to say, if I'm helping someone build a website, for example, well, what can I add on to that website? SEO, right? What can I add on to that SEO? Blog development, right? So all these different things are essentially three different markets, but they all work together in unison. So that's what I'm talking about as far as scalability and as far as your services. Market penetration, market development, product development, and diversification. These are all based upon, it's called, I think I call it the growth matrix. So there's these four different components. I don't think we're going to have time to dive into those today, but ideally, if you're doing market penetration, you're talking to your current clients about new products. And if you're doing market development, you're talking to a new market about your old products. And if you're doing product development, you're talking to your current market, which provides new products that they never heard of before. And then diversification is a new market sector with new products. So again, you want to think about it right now. Majority of us are in market penetration. How do you take that and you go to market development? And how do you go from market development to product development? And then last but not least is diversification. And all of these things are collectively designed and developed from a business model. So you may be familiar with I think most people are probably more so familiar with not necessarily a business model, but a business plan. And so I want you to kind of identify that they're completely two different things. A business plan is essentially, I always look at it as a book, a novel, and a business model is essentially an overview, a cheat sheet that's one page that has the overview of everything that you need to know about your business. And you can easily see what you're missing, why you're missing it, and then fill in that void before you even get to your business plan. So when you put all these together like Transformers, you get the digital brand growth strategy. So you can identify these four regions together, and you can kind of almost do like a quick checklist to see, okay, what am I not doing? What am I missing? And ideally, if you have at least some of the elements on each one of these categories, that's when you get into more of a digital strategy for your brand and growth strategy all together collectively at the same time. And I'll go into like a larger view so you guys can take a screenshot of that if you would like. And then last but not least, any questions?
I just have a quick one. So I love how you called a trademark an unfair advantage. I've never heard it be called, well, you may have said it before, but I've never really heard that terminology. And I think whether it's a trademark or anything else, having a brand that stands out, I just think that's such an important piece is to have an unfair advantage like that. Do you have any tips on, how to stand out? I mean, I know you're always talking about wear your brand as much as you can. I mean, we could almost play a game with how many do you see in your screen right now, which is so important. But any other tips along those lines?
I would just say I think it kind of goes back to the presentation that I did at Texas. It's you're gonna have to do your due diligence before you even decide on creating what that brand or that visual is going to be, and you have to understand the keywords that support that. So, for me, like if you're looking at my presentation, you can see my presentation is 100% built upon my brand. The four arrows, the four circles, right? Then my color palettes are all coming together. So again, everything that I design and develop for presentations or that I'm printing out or whatever I'm going to do are all stemming from that icon. Like literally every single presentation I do, I go back to these four resources and then I pull those four resources apart. And I can even show you like another deck that dives into the business modeling. So this is like the business model deck. This is the growth matrix that I was talking about. But you can kind of see the colors are exactly the same, right? And then I'm just breaking them down into different sections based upon different topics. So again, you have to be consistent. You have to identify your value proposition. You have to identify your colors. You have to identify your target community, and then you have to stick to it. Okay. Again, consistency is king when it comes to this.
And I know the biggest mistake I made was making my value proposition price. And I learned that that's not a good value proposition. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah. So,
Unless you're like $20 chiropractor, which, they're closing down left and right as we speak. So
yeah, I think that's really important to find what your value proposition is, but make sure it's not price is not the focus.
correct. Because that could be variables. I mean, if I'm going for more B2B and my B2B is B to corporate B2B, obviously the extra zero is attached to that by default, just because it's corporate and again, they can write it off. Versus if I'm talking to a small business owner, there may be more of a discount, but I'm not going to charge a small business owner $200,000 for a particular product because again, that's going to be out their reach for the same product.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question. Oh,
Yep.
go ahead. So in Texas, you talked about basically having your different pillars of your business and how you're always making sure that you're working on one so that they're all catching up with each other over your quarters.
Mhm.
But if you have, how do you make sure that you are focused on maybe one of those pillars that really needs more help than the other one? Because you said when everything's working together, you should be able to compete with yourself.
Correct.
But I'm more in that starting phase, so I wanted to ask.
Yeah. So you focus on one. And I think during Neil's presentation last week, we talked about it at first. I was like, you could have omnipresence on multiple different platforms, but you're not going to be like an influencer on all the platforms all at the same time. But what you would do is you itemize one platform at a time. So, and it's the same thing with this. You itemize one brand at a time. So if it's your personal brand, you build on that. And then you build out your company brand, or you build your company brand, and you build your personal brand. And as you start to build these pillars out, they'll start to get some synergy. Like prime example with like my Boston Cage and SA Grant. Well, SA Grant came before Boston Cage, and then Boston Cage outweighed SA Grant, and then it became a competition between both of them. It was like, okay, well, SA Grant's gonna speak on the stage. Well, Boston Cage is gonna get more downloads, and then we just kept going back and forth, and then we started creating the products and services, and then we started getting the equilibrium. So ideally, if you're talking about it from a standpoint, I would personify all these elements, look at them as people, and give them responsibilities. And if they do their responsibilities correctly, much like an employee, that's when you'll start to see the reoccurring revenue, or you'll start to see like the actual success come from it.
Right.
I've got one essay.
Yep.
So on the four types of brands,
Mhm.
do you think you said that you probably would do two minimum, or would you want to do all four ultimately?
I mean, ideally, if we're following like our predecessors, right? I mean, Microsoft has this formula. Apple has this formula. I mean, literally, you can probably think about any of the trillion-dollar, billion-dollar brands out there. This is the formula that they're following. But ideally, to get to that stage, you have to at least start with one or two of them. So I would say if you want to start with a company brand and then a product brand, or you want to start with a personal brand and a company, I would say for small business owners, that's ideal. That's the best two combinations to start with. Because again, your company is going to be where those invoices are coming from. But ideally, those clients are talking and communicating with you. You're the person that's actually closing the deals. You're the person that they either like or fell in love with, and even the reason why they want to work with your company in the first place. So if you start there, and then you scale out.
Secondarily,
Mhm.
what about the business that you're in, the type of business you're in? Does that affect which direction you would go in?
I would say no. I mean, it really comes down to if it, I mean, this service based, right? So if you have a primary service, then that service will be premium to the company versus the personal brand, right? If you have a product, like if you're selling perfume, well, then that perfume kind of becomes like the main brand and is associated to the company. So to answer your question, yes and no. It just really comes down to how you want to do it. Because again, even with perfume, a lot of times what sells perfume is the brand of someone in the commercial that's putting the perfume on. That's the leverage for that actual product brand to be sold. So
Excellent. Thank you.
no problem.
I have a question about trademarks, and this might be for Carrie too. Like your intellectual property and protecting it as you go along. As you're growing and you're building out, are you trademarking things? What is the process for that? When do you know when to go handle that kind of portfolio and put it all together?
Yep. So for me, I started the process for trademarking Boston Cage. I started Boston Cage, the podcast, and the company February of 2020, and I started the process April of that year. Now, keep in mind, everything that I have going on right now wasn't even in existence 2 years ago. But I knew, because I've done my due diligence and I've built brands before, that I knew eventually this brand would kind of get big enough to where I'm going to have the protection. But I've also did other trademarks before, knowing that a trademark could take anywhere from 9 to 18 months. So again, you have to have that foreshadowing, that growth strategy, the scale in mind to know that, okay, I'm building something and potentially down the road, I'm going to have this protection. But if you wait, then you waited too late.
And sadly, SA, that has actually grown to roughly anywhere from 2 to 3 years for some instances, for some trademarks now. So I love that you bring up this point, and I'm so glad you asked this question, Krista, because it's such a good SA and I are such a good merge of the legal side, which he has far more knowledge than any other branding person I have ever talked to about the legality of trademarks. But it is an interesting merger of the marketing side and the trademark side, and that is such an important piece that he brings up. Is it can take 3 years, and there are kind of two strategies. One, you can just start using the name and you can worry about protecting it after. The one recommendation I would make is to just document your use, because it's hard to go back after the fact and try to figure it out. And if within a year or two no one reaches out with that cease and desist letter, you have common law rights. You may not get that trademark. There still may be something else out there preventing you from getting it. But like SA said, if it's important to you and you don't want to have to wait 6 months, 18 months, maybe even 2 or 3 years, you're going to want to start that trademark process a lot sooner.
Yeah, and I mean, in addition to that trademark thing, I always look at the trademark as like a compounding interest thing. And what I mean by that is, like, you do your brand strategy, the core name of that trademark is what you need to trademark. So that way, anything that falls under its secondary, prime example, Boston Cage is my trademark. So it allows me to do what? Boston Cage podcast, Boston Cage book club, Boston Cage car club, or like whatever the hell I want to. Nobody's ever going to be able to have that because I own the Boston Cage. But the descripting word that comes in secondary is my identifying factor. So once you understand those principles, you want to make sure that your brand is solid enough that all your secondary brands that may come out of it, or your services that may come out of that, are all underneath that one trademark.
Thank you for that. I know I have that foresight, but then the process, right? I've talked with Carrie before about, as I was going along and looking at trademarks and things, I found like this little patentable piece, whether to patent or whether to do market research on it or just go out and talk. But I still want to have that trademark piece, and it's the process of it. And if you're going in the right direction, I think I'm questioning myself a lot. But I do see it as that compounding interest and not wanting to go back and have to defend it as hard, right?
No, you just gotta, like, if you ever look at my stuff that I do on social media, I may ask the audience for their input, And then literally within 7 days, I'm putting that product, whatever it is, even though I may not have that product established as of yet, I'm putting it on social media and I'll keep posting about it just for the reason what she was talking about. Like now I have proof of use. So if I decide to then do a sub trademark or anything else, I've been doing proof of use well in advance because again, I've trained myself to do it like everything that I do.
One
Go ahead.
I was just going to say one other advantage too to filing a trademark is you can file what's called an intent to use mark. So maybe it's a mark that you're not using yet, but you want to know if you're going to be able to use it or if you're going to run into any problems. So you can do that, or it will just tell you if there's anyone else out there that's going to have a problem with your mark, because you can apply for it. The trademark office can say, yes, we approve it, but then literally anyone can oppose it. And one of my favorite examples is Apple Live Photos. So they applied for a trademark for, if you have an iPhone, they have live photos. They applied for a trademark on that term. It was allowed by the trademark office, and a completely independent third party came in and said, you can't get a trademark on live photos. That's descriptive of what it is. It's a live photo. And so sometimes it can be literally a completely independent person that just says, I think you're trying to go too broad with the term that you're trying to associate with what you're doing. So that's a reason. And sometimes if a name is that important to you, some people, they could change their name tomorrow and it's not a big deal. Maybe they're just getting started out. They don't have that brand recognition. But if you're really going to have that brand recognition, you may want to make sure that it's something you can protect. And sorry, I hope I'm not stepping on your toes too much, Essay. Okay, good.
Hey, you're the IP specialist. I just know about it. So.
Perfect. Okay, good.
Well, then I have a question. You're saying proof of use. Other people say make sure that you have your paperwork in or your provisional patent first. Which is it?
So I would say make sure the patent and the trademark are not confused. So the patent is going to protect the actual product. And in some cases, it may protect the service that you're providing if there is anything unique in the service, or if there's an app that's doing some cool, unique things. That's going to be covered by the patent. The patent can be kept secret for, depending on a lot of varieties, a lot of factors I don't want to get into, that can be kept secret for a while. Trademark, on the flip side, that's going to be publicly known as soon as you file on it. So if you're trying to keep the details of this is what my product or service is secret, you can still do that, but you may want to file on the name itself sooner rather than later, because a lot can happen over the 2 or 3 years of your patent pending. But it's really advantageous, that good unfair advantage that SA was talking about, if you know, okay, I'm going to be able to protect it. The one caveat to the intent to use is you have to start using within 2.5 years. I always make sure that people know that. So when you file, hey, I'm going to start using this trademark, you don't have to start using it right away, but if you don't use it within 2.5 years, you will lose rights to that. So hope that wasn't too lawyer-y. I try really hard to not sound too much like a lawyer, so.
No, that was good.
You failed, Carrie, but it was good anyway.
We are at time. Essay, do you have any parting words for us?
No, I mean, hopefully you guys got value from it. If you have any questions, feel free to book a VC. And again, I love doing this. This is like my passion. So by all means, feel free to ask any questions if they come up.
Awesome.
I would just ask, how can we get a hold of the recording from today?
I'll post it on YouTube and make it private, and I'll share it to you guys.
Thank you so much, Essay. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem.